Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. No irony, straight up. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, within these last hours, in a very careful conversation with two leading senators, McCain and Graham, says that the Obama administration's policy in Syria is a failure. He says that in a manner that it is not just about the Geneva II peace conference that failed, according to the United Nations. He says that in light of the fact that he says that Assad is slow rolling, that's his metaphor, slow rolling the United Nations with regard to surrendering the chemical weapons in Syria. Secretary of State also says that the Islamists, the jihadists, number 26,000, that's a number I believe General Clapper has used, on the Syrian battlefield, and that they are a threat not only to the people of the region, but a transnational threat, because many of those 26,000, hundreds, perhaps thousands, have passports in the European Union and elsewhere. We don't rule out American passports in the fighting in Syria. I welcome now Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. They join me and my colleague and co-host, Thaddeus McCotter, at WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. Thaddeus, I thought I should get out John Kerry's announcement of failure of the Obama administration's policy in Syria right away, because it's a surprising break between the President and the Secretary of State. Does this strike you as surprising right now, that John Kerry would declare failure so soon after the peace conference, knowing that the president is negotiating very, very difficult terms with the Iranians? Good evening to you, Thaddeus.
Good evening, John. Yes, it's very surprising to me, especially because, as you point out, he seems to be undermining the president's position. And if you're heading into negotiations, the last thing you want is your Secretary of State saying that your policy's already failed.
I think that if this had happened in your experience in the Bush administration, where Condoleezza Rice would have declared the president's policy in Iraq a failure, it would have been a headline. Perhaps it would have been a week-long special, Thaddeus.
Yes, it certainly would have been. But in hindsight, Condoleezza Rice had not been an elected official in her own right or a presidential candidate. That may be part of the problem. There have been instances historically, as you well know, John, of when a Secretary of State has been a leading figure in their own right. They do sometimes have differences of opinion quite publicly with the president who appointed them.
Mr. Joscelyn, I begin with you tonight because of your report of what looks to be a strong disagreement between the jihadist Islamists of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham, especially Bakr AlBaghdadi, and the general command of al-Qaeda. What is the nature of the dispute, and who is Baghdadi to stand up to al-Qaeda's general command? Good evening to you, Tom.
Well, good evening, John. There's been this ongoing dispute between the head of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham, which was a official al-Qaeda affiliate for a number of years. His name is Bakr AlBaghdadi, and the senior leadership of al-Qaeda. Basically, Baghdadi has delusions of grandeur. He's someone who believes himself to be the rightful ruler over a large state encompassing not only Iraq and Syria, but also other parts of the Levant. And he's tried to actually declare himself to be the new caliph, the new sort of ruler over the Muslim world. And basically, al-Qaeda senior leadership thinks this is crazy. A lot of other al-Qaeda actors think this is crazy and think that this actually jeopardizes their mission in Syria, which is to get rid of Assad and to consolidate their control and influence over other rebel groups. And so basically, Baghdadi's delusions of grandeur have gotten in the way of al-Qaeda's game plan repeatedly. He's repeatedly refused to follow orders from Ayman al-Zawahiri and other senior al-Qaeda actors, and so finally they cut him off.
Bill, just a note here, because the Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham is a dynamic and aggressive organization. Suicide team against the transportation ministry in Baghdad. Why, Bill? Why are they launching on the Maliki government?
The Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham has continually been fighting the Iraqi government and the Iraqi military. Remember, they took control of large areas of Anbar province in the west. They're still in control of the city of Fallujah and partially in control of the city of Ramadi, which is the provincial capital, and a whole series of towns along the Euphrates River Valley. And I think they're trying to keep the pressure off so they can consolidate control in Anbar and other areas that it's taking control. And so it's all part of a series of attacks as well. They want to show that they can continue to hit hit the Iraqi government and military, not just in the peripheries, but right in the heart. They're continuing to wage their insurgency inside of Iraq, and doing so quite effectively.
Note the scale here. The suicide assaults, it was a complex attack with shooters and suicide bombers in Baghdad, reaching all the way into the battlefields of Syria, all the way to the gates of Aleppo, right up against the Lebanese border. Thaddeus?
Well, I think the scale is absolutely disconcerting to a lot of people. I think that Bill and Tom have been talking about that for quite some time. When you take the president's enunciated policy of trying to diminish, quote-unquote, core al-Qaeda, what you have to ask yourself is that working, or are we seeing a spin-off that is just as coordinated from disparate entities within the terrorist network themselves that may not have that direct connection nor need it anymore?
Let's go to that, Tom. Transnational threat to the 26,000, so that's the number the Secretary of State is using, to the 26,000 in Syria, Islamists working for Baghdadi or the al-Nusra Front. Do they represent a transnational threat?
Well, they do. I mean, part of what's happened here, part of what's really fascinating about the Syrian war is that al-Qaeda senior leadership has basically multiple hands they've been playing within the insurgency. And ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham, was never their main play in Syria. They never actually wanted Baghdadi to come into Syria and do what he did. And in fact, the al-Nusra Front, which is their main affiliate in al-Qaeda in Syria, is still the main al-Qaeda representative in Syria. But they've also played an amazing role inside other organizations, including I've documented a group called Roggio Sham, which is an extremist group which fights alongside al-Qaeda in Syria. And actually, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda, his main guy inside Syria is a founding member and senior leader in Roggio Sham, which probably has somewhere between 10 and 20,000 fighters, if not even more. And so they have a strong degree of influence within a group that's not even officially recognized as al-Qaeda. Now, here's the key distinction here. The president and the Obama administration talks about core al-Qaeda and decimated, and they've got them on the run, and they're drawing them to death in Pakistan. But here, the main representative of Ayman al-Zawahiri inside Syria is actually a senior leader in an extremist group that has well over 10,000 fighters.
Let's grow the battlefield one more time. Bill, 2 al-Qaeda operatives associated with the top terrorist leader among 7 jihadists killed in a U.S. airstrike along the Afghan-Pakistan border, December 2013. This means that it doesn't just stretch to the gates of Baghdad, it stretches all the way to the Hindu Kush. And all of these agents, Bill, are they al-Qaeda members? I understand there's this term of art that the president used in the State of the Union, core al-Qaeda, but are these as sophisticated and dangerous as any other?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom and I, as you know, we just find this idea of a core al-Qaeda, the government's, the administration's definition of core al-Qaeda is essentially meaningless. They haven't given us a definition of it. It changes depending on their whims, but the 2 al-Qaeda leaders that were killed, they worked with Elias Kashmiri, who served as al-Qaeda's military commander and also a long-term Pakistani jihadist. They're as core al-Qaeda as it gets. Their job was to confer with the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban, and they're plotting and scheming activities in Afghanistan. And, so the government wants to claim that Zawahiri is hiding in some cave, and meanwhile we have al-Qaeda General Command issuing directives that are being followed by all of those who consider themselves al-Qaeda, except for the Islamic State.
Thaddeus, your opinion of the President's State of the Union, was he convincing, claiming that core al-Qaeda was defeated? Did the American people listen to that as a success when he declared Iraq concluded, and now he's declaring Afghanistan concluded? Was that convincing?
Well, I don't think so, and I think there's 2 reasons. One, the very reason we've been talking about. If core al-Qaeda is being decimated, then why are the scale and complexity of terrorist attacks in the Middle East increasing? It makes no sense. Secondly, the president seems to conflate the concept of a large pitched military battle with the number of troops. As you know, what he said in the State of the Union was somehow that we're going to avoid these massive pitched battles, but that's not what we've been doing, and it's certainly not what we've been doing since the Petraeus Plan was introduced as counterterrorism measures and counterinsurgency measures within Iraq, and what we're trying to do with the Afghans. So I think that both in terms of those 2 instances and the overall policy approach, it's one thing to declare a victory, it's another to actually achieve it.
We've traveled from the gates of Aleppo to the gates of Baghdad, all the way to the Afpak border. However, when we come back, Tom Joscelyn is going to take us to Tehran. Al-Qaeda in Tehran. That's right. The Iranians who are negotiating with the President of the United States and the P5+1 about their suspect nuclear weapons program. Offering sanctuary, offering hospitality to an Al-Qaeda leader in Tehran. I'm John Batchelor with Thaddeus McCotter at WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. This is The John Batchelor Show.